She was standing 3 feet away from him, holding a notepad, wearing a waitress uniform, and she was pregnant, very, very pregnant. Ethan Crawford, a $3 billion man, had just sat down at the most exclusive restaurant in New York City with his new girlfriend. And the woman taking his drink order was his wife. The wife who vanished 9 months ago without a single word, no note, no phone call, no goodbye. Just an empty closet and a wedding ring left on the counter. He had spent 9 months telling himself she did not love him, 9 months convincing himself she had used him and walked away. But she had not walked away. She had run from something so terrifying that she chose poverty over protection. She chose a broken lock and a chair jammed under her door over a penthouse overlooking Central Park. She chose to starve rather than stay. And the reason she ran? It was not a stranger. It was not an enemy. It was the one person Ethan trusted most in the world. What she is about to tell him in a dirty alley behind that restaurant will shatter everything he thought he knew about his marriage, about his mother, and about the child he never knew existed. This story will teach you something most people learn too late. The person standing right beside you could be drowning, and you will never notice if you are not paying attention. Love is not about what you can buy. It is about what you are willing to see. If this story makes you feel something, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story like this. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from today. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Sometimes one story can change the way someone sees the people they love. Now let us begin.
Ethan Crawford had everything a man could want. $3 billion in the bank, a penthouse overlooking Central Park with floor-to-ceiling windows that made the whole city look like something he owned. His face had been on the cover of Forbes twice before he turned 35. When he walked into a room, conversations stopped. People straightened their ties. Assistants scrambled. The world bent itself around Ethan Crawford like water around a stone. But for 9 months, he had been living with a hole in his chest that all his money could not fill. His wife had vanished. No note, no phone call, no explanation, just an empty closet and a wedding ring sitting on the kitchen counter like a tiny, silver accusation. He had stood in their bedroom doorway for 20 minutes that night, staring at the spaces where her things used to be, trying to understand how a person could simply cease to exist. Tonight, in the last place on earth he would ever expect, he was about to see her again. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same. Before we continue, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you are watching from today. New York? London? Toronto? Dallas? I want to know. And if this story moves you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Now, here is something this story will teach you, and it is something most people learn too late. The person standing right beside you might be drowning, and you will not notice until they are gone. Pay attention to the people you love. It might be the most important thing you ever do. The restaurant was called Monarch. It was not just fancy, it was legendary. 3 Michelin stars, a 6-month waiting list. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings that were 3 stories high. The floors were Italian marble, so polished you could see your reflection. A single bottle of wine cost more than most people paid in rent. Senators ate beside tech billionaires. Movie stars hid in private booths. If you could get a table at Monarch, you had made it in life. Ethan walked through the front door at exactly 8 o'clock. His girlfriend, Nicole Ashford, walked beside him. She wore a black dress that probably cost $5,000, and she knew exactly how good she looked in it. Nicole was the kind of woman who belonged on magazine covers. Tall, blonde, perfect smile, perfect posture. She was a corporate attorney, one of the biggest law firms in Manhattan, and she had been dating Ethan for 4 months. She was smart, ambitious, and absolutely certain she would be Mrs. Crawford by next Christmas. The restaurant manager, a thin man named Gerald, practically sprinted across the floor to greet them. "Mr. Crawford, your table is ready. The corner booth, as requested." "Thank you, Gerald." They settled into their booth. It was private, tucked near the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the city skyline. Candles flickered on white linen tablecloths. Everything was perfect, the kind of perfect that money could buy. Except Ethan could not stop checking his phone. "You promised," Nicole said, her voice tight with irritation. "One dinner, no emails, no calls, no checking stock prices." "Sorry, force of habit." Ethan placed his phone, Twelwood face down on the table, but he was not thinking about work. He was thinking about 9 months ago, about walking into the apartment he shared with Grace and finding it half empty, her clothes gone, her books gone, the little succulent plants she kept on the windowsill gone. And that ring, that thin silver band sitting on the cold marble countertop like a period at the end of a sentence. She was done, and she had not even told him why. "Ethan." Nicole snapped her fingers in front of his face. "You are doing it again. That faraway look. I am here. I am present. What were you saying about the Henderson case?" Nicole launched into a story about a corporate merger she was handling, but Ethan was only half listening. His eyes drifted around the restaurant, watching the waitstaff move between tables, thinking about everything and nothing. That is when someone approached their table. "Good evening. Welcome to Monarch. Can I start you both with something to drink?" The voice was quiet, professional, polite, but something about it made every cell in Ethan Crawford's body freeze solid. The cadence, the softness, the way it dipped slightly at the end of a sentence, like a gentle slope leading somewhere safe. He knew that voice. He knew it the way you know your own heartbeat, the way you know the sound of rain on a window at night, the way you know home. Slowly, so slowly it felt like moving through water, Ethan lifted his eyes from the menu. And the entire world stopped spinning. Standing beside his table, wearing a black uniform, holding a small notepad, was Grace. His wife. But she was not the Grace he remembered. She was thinner, much thinner. Her cheekbones were sharper, almost severe. There were shadows under her eyes that looked permanent, like bruises that had been there so long they had become part of her face. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, instead of the soft waves he remembered. And she was pregnant, not a little pregnant, not maybe she'd just had a big lunch. She was enormously, unmistakably about to have a baby pregnant. Her belly pressed against her black uniform, round and obvious and undeniable. Time stopped, the clinking glasses, the murmured conversations, the soft jazz from the speakers, all of it faded to absolute silence. Ethan could not breathe. His heart slammed against his ribs so hard he was afraid they might crack. Grace stood perfectly still. Her face showed nothing. Not surprise, not anger, not fear. Nothing at all. She was a statue holding a pen, waiting for a drink order. For one terrible frozen moment, their eyes met. And in that moment, Ethan saw his wife. He saw 9 months of unanswered questions. He saw a stranger wearing the face of the woman he had loved more than anything in his life. And he saw that belly, carrying a life he knew nothing about. She is pregnant. The thought hit him like a freight train derailing. Whose baby? When? How? But somewhere, deep in his gut, in the place where truth lives, even when your brain refuses to accept it, he already knew the answer. "Ethan?" Nicole's voice cut through the fog like a blade. "What is wrong?" You look like you have seen a ghost." Ethan could not speak. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. His tongue felt thick and useless, like it belonged to someone else. Grace's face remained perfectly composed, professional, distant. She stood there like any other waitress at Monarch, notepad ready, pen poised, waiting for a drink order, as if they were strangers, as if she had not slept beside him for 3 years, as if she had not vanished from his life without a word of explanation. "Sir," Grace said, and her voice was steady as stone, "what can I get you to drink, sir?" That single word, cold and formal and final, hit Ethan harder than a fist. She called him sir, like he was nobody, like he was just another rich man in an expensive suit, sitting in an expensive restaurant, ordering an expensive drink. Nicole's eyes darted between Ethan and Grace. Her lawyer instincts kicked in immediately. She was reading the room, calculating, analyzing. "Do you two know each other?" Ethan finally found his voice. It came out raw and cracked, like a door that had not been opened in years. "Grace?" For just a fraction of a second, something flickered across Grace's face. Pain, fear, maybe both. It was there and gone so fast that if you blinked, you would have missed it entirely. Then the wall came back up, thick and impenetrable. "I will come back when you are ready to order," Grace said quietly and started to turn away. "Wait." Ethan stood up so fast that his chair scraped across the marble floor with a sound like a scream. Every head in the restaurant turned. Forks froze midway to mouths. Conversations died mid-sentence. Grace stopped, but she did not turn around. "What are you doing here?" Ethan's voice was louder than he intended. His hands were shaking. "Where have you been? Why did you leave?" His eyes dropped to her belly, and the words caught in his throat. "And what are you—" "Ethan?" Nicole grabbed his arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his sleeve. "Sit down. Everyone is staring at us." But Ethan did not care about everyone. He did not care about Nicole or the restaurant or his reputation or the senators and movie stars pretending not to watch. The only thing that existed in his universe was the woman standing 3 feet away from him. Grace turned back slowly. She looked exhausted in a way that went past sleep deprivation into something deeper, something that lived in the bones. Her hands had small cuts and red marks on them, the kind you get from carrying heavy trays and washing dishes in scalding water for 12 hours at a stretch. "I am working, sir," she said, putting careful emphasis on that last word. "Please sit down." She called him sir again, like a wall between them, like a locked door with no key. The restaurant manager, Gerald, appeared instantly, sensing a situation that could damage his establishment's reputation. "Is there a problem here?" "No problem," Grace said immediately, smoothly. "Just taking their order." Nicole stood up. Her face had gone through several colors in the past 60 seconds and had settled on a deep, furious red. Her voice dropped to a sharp whisper. "That is her, is it not? Your ex-wife? The one who disappeared?" Her eyes went to Grace's belly and widened. "And she is pregnant." "Oh my God, Ethan, is that your baby?" "I do not know," Ethan whispered. "You do not know?" Nicole's composure shattered like a champagne glass dropped on marble. "I am sitting in a 3 Michelin star restaurant, and my boyfriend's pregnant ex-wife is our waitress, and you do not know if that is your baby." "Nicole, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" "That you are still in love with her? I saw the way you looked at her, Ethan, like she was the only person in the world, like I was not even here." Nicole snatched her clutch from the table. Her eyes were bright with angry tears. "We are done. Do not call me. Do not text me. And do not you dare send flowers like you did with the last one." She walked out. Her heels struck the marble floor like gunshots, each step a punctuation mark on the end of their relationship. Every single person in Monarch watched her leave. Ethan stood alone at his table, the most powerful man in the room, and he had never felt more helpless in his entire life. He did not sit back down. He did not order. He stood there for 5 minutes, then 10. A different waiter approached and asked if he would like to see the menu. Ethan waved him away without looking. His eyes were locked on the kitchen door, the door Grace had disappeared behind. Finally, he could not wait anymore. Ethan walked toward the kitchen. Gerald tried to intercept him, stepping into his path with the practiced smile of a man trained to handle difficult guests. "Mr. Crawford, I am sorry, but guests are not permitted in the kitchen. Move." Ethan said it quietly, but something in his voice, something cold and absolute and dangerous, made Gerald step aside like he had been physically shoved. Ethan pushed through the kitchen doors. Inbad was controlled chaos. Steam billowed from enormous pots. Cooks shouted orders across stainless steel counters. Pans hissed and sizzled. The heat was oppressive, almost violent, a wall of hot air that hit him the moment he stepped through. And there, in the far corner, sitting on an overturned milk crate next to a stack of vegetable boxes, was Grace. Her face was buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Something inside Ethan broke, not cracked, broke, like a dam giving way to a flood that had been building for 9 months. He walked toward her slowly, and the kitchen noise seemed to fade until there was only her. "Grace, sorry, he said softly. Her head snapped up. When she saw him, she wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist and stood up in one quick motion, smoothing her uniform with trembling hands. "You cannot be back here. This area is for staff only." "I do not care about the rules, Grace. We need to talk." "There is nothing to talk about." She tried to walk past him. Ethan reached out and gently touched her arm, not grabbing, not holding, just a touch, a connection. "Please, 5 minutes. That is all I am asking." Grace pulled her arm away. "Do not touch me." A massive cook, a guy built like a linebacker with tattoo sleeves and surprisingly kind eyes, looked over from his station. "This guy bothering you, Grace?" "It is fine, Marcus. He is leaving." But Ethan did not leave. He stood there, really looking at her for the first time. Not at the woman he remembered, but at the woman standing in front of him right now. She was so different. The Grace he knew had worn cashmere sweaters and curled up in the window seat of their apartment, reading novels on Sunday mornings. That Grace had a laugh that could fill a room and a smile that made the worst day bearable. That Grace smelled like vanilla and always had paint under her fingernails from the watercolors she did on weekends. This Grace looked like she had been through a war. Her uniform was slightly too large, hanging off shoulders that had gotten thinner. Her sneakers were held together with what appeared to be duct tape on one sole. Her hands were rough and red, but she was still beautiful to him. Still the woman who had made his penthouse feel like a home instead of a museum. Still Grace. "The baby," Ethan said quietly. "Is it mine?" Grace's jaw tightened, her eyes hardened. "That is none of your business." "None of my business?" "Grace, you are my wife." "Was." She corrected him like a teacher correcting a spelling mistake. "I was your wife. Past tense. We are still legally married. You never filed for divorce. You just vanished." "And whose fault was that?" The words came out sharp and bitter, and they hung in the steaming kitchen air like a blade between them. The kitchen manager, a stocky woman with her hair under a net, approached them with an expression that made it clear she had zero patience for personal drama during dinner rush. "Take it outside, both of you, now." Grace grabbed a thin jacket from a hook on the wall and walked out the back door without looking at Ethan. He followed her into the alley behind the restaurant. It was narrow and ugly. A single buzzing fluorescent light cast harsh shadows on brick walls streaked with grime. Dumpsters lined one side. The air smelled like old grease and garbage. This was the other side of Monarch, the side the guests in their designer clothes and diamond watches never saw. Grace leaned against the brick wall, one hand supporting her lower back, the other resting on her belly. In this brutal light, she looked even more exhausted. The shadows under her eyes were almost purple. 5 minutes, she said flatly. Talk. Why did you leave? Because I had to. That is not an answer, Grace. It is the only one you are getting. The baby. Please, just tell me. Is it mine? Silence. A long, heavy silence broken only by distant traffic sounds and the hum of a kitchen exhaust fan. Then, very quietly, almost a whisper, she said, "Yes." The ground shifted under Ethan's feet. The alley walls seemed to tilt. His baby, she was carrying his baby, had been carrying his baby for 9 months while he had been eating at restaurants like Monarch, sleeping in Egyptian cotton sheets, flying to meetings on private jets. When did you find out? 2 weeks before I left. So you have been pregnant for 9 months, and you never told me? Almost due now? 3 weeks, maybe less. 3 weeks. He was going to become a father in 3 weeks, and until 5 minutes ago, he had not even known. Why? The word came out broken, cracked right down the middle. Why did you not come to me? We could have figured it out together. Grace laughed. It was the saddest, most bitter sound Ethan had ever heard. No warmth in it, no humor, just pain wearing the disguise of laughter. Figured it out? With your mother standing between us like a prison guard? There was nothing to figure out, Ethan. My mother? What does my mother have to do with any of this? Grace pushed off the wall and looked directly at him. Her eyes were hard and burning, lit up with an anger that had been building for 9 months. Your mother has everything to do with this. She is the reason I left. She is the reason I have been hiding. She is the reason I work 12 hours a day in a restaurant kitchen instead of being home with you, picking out baby names and painting a nursery. She stopped. Her voice cracked on those last words, and she pressed her lips together hard, refusing to let the rest of the emotion through. Tell me everything, Ethan said. From the beginning. Grace closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet. Your mother hated me from the day you introduced us. You thought she was just being protective. Ethan, she hated me. She told me I was trash. She said I was a small-town nobody who got lucky. She said I had trapped you. She never said those things in front of me. Of course she did not. She was smart about it. Always when you were not in the room. Always with a perfect smile on her face, so that if I ever complained, I would look like the crazy one. Grace's hands were trembling now. The lunches where she forgot to invite me. The charity galas where she introduced you to other women, beautiful, wealthy, appropriate women, right in front of me. The little comments about my clothes, my family, my education. She took a shaky breath. 3 months after our wedding, she took me to lunch, just the two of us. She ordered champagne, like we were celebrating something. Then she slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a cashier's check for $2 million. Ethan felt ice spreading through his veins. What? $2 million to disappear from your life. She smiled at me across the table and said, You are a sweet girl, Grace, but you are not built for this world. Take the money. Start over somewhere nice. Ethan will recover. Men like him always do. No. Ethan's voice was hollow. No, she would not. I tore up the check. I told her I loved you, and nothing would change that. Grace wiped her eyes roughly with the back of her hand. That was my mistake, because after I refused the money, she stopped being subtle. What do you mean? She started a campaign. Little things at first. Canceling my hair appointments, double booking events so I would show up to an empty restaurant. Then bigger things. She told your business partners' wives I was a gold digger. She told your cousin Rebecca that I was having an affair. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Rebecca had told him that. He remembered it now. A casual conversation at a family dinner. Rebecca leaning in and saying, I do not want to cause drama, but have you noticed Grace has been acting a little suspicious lately? He had asked Grace about it, tried to sound casual, and she had looked at him with such hurt in her eyes. He had told himself it was nothing. When I found out I was pregnant, Grace continued, her voice dropping lower, I was terrified and happy at the same time. I thought maybe this would change everything. Maybe a grandchild would soften her. She laughed that bitter laugh again. I told your mother before I could tell you. She came to the apartment the next day while you were at work. She sat in our living room, drank the tea I made her, and then she looked me in the eyes. Grace's voice went flat. Dead. Like she was reading from a police report. She said, I will take that child from you. I have lawyers your little kindergarten teacher's salary could never afford. I have judges who owe me favors. No court in this country will let a nobody like you raise a Crawford heir. You will never hold that baby. I will make sure of it. The alley was silent except for the distant sound of traffic. I could not eat for 3 days, Grace whispered. I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her taking my baby out of my arms. So I did the only thing I could think of. I packed one bag while you were at work. I left my ring because I did not want you to think I had stolen it. And I ran. Ethan's back hit the brick wall. He slid down until he was sitting on the filthy alley ground, his $1,000 suit pressed against concrete, streaked with grime, and he did not care. 9 months, he said. You have been running for 9 months. I have been surviving for 9 months, Grace corrected him. There is a difference. Where have you been living? Grace hesitated. An apartment in Hunts Point. Ethan flinched like he had been slapped. Hunts Point, one of the roughest, most dangerous neighborhoods in the Bronx. It was what I could afford, Grace said. $500 a month for a studio, no heat half the time. The lock on the door did not work properly, so I jammed a chair under the handle at night. A chair under the door handle, while he slept in a penthouse with a 24-hour doorman. I work 3 jobs, waitress here at Monarch 4 nights a week, cashier at a bodega in the mornings, and I do laundry and mending for an elderly woman on my block on Sundays. Between the 3, I make just enough to cover rent and food and a little savings for when the baby comes. Have you seen a doctor? Silence. Grace, have you seen a doctor? Once. A free clinic in the Bronx. 4 months ago. You are 9 months pregnant and you have seen a doctor once? Do you know what an appointment costs without insurance, Ethan? I had to choose between seeing a doctor and eating for a week. I chose eating. Ethan put his head in his hands, and in that moment, sitting on the dirty ground of an alley behind a restaurant where a single meal cost $300, the billionaire who had everything finally understood that he had nothing at all. Come with me, Ethan said, pulling himself up off the ground. Right now. I am taking you to a hospital. I cannot just leave. My shift is not over. They will fire me. Grace, you are 9 months pregnant, and you have not had proper medical care. Nothing else matters right now. Money does not fix this, Ethan. Grace's voice turned sharp as a knife edge. Money is all your family has ever used to solve problems, and it is the reason I almost lost my baby. The words hit like a punch because they were true. Every word. Then what do you want me to do? Ethan asked, and for the first time in his life, there was no authority in his voice, no CEO confidence, no billionaire certainty, just a man standing in an alley asking a question he did not know the answer to. Grace studied him for a long time. I want you to listen. I want you to believe me without demanding proof. I want you to choose me, not because it is easy, but because it is right. I believe you. You did not before. I was blind before. I was stupid. I was everything you think I was, and worse. That is not enough. Then let me prove it. Not with money, not with grand gestures, with time, with actions, starting right now, starting with getting you to a doctor. Grace stood there in the alley, one hand on her belly, the other hanging at her side. 9 months of survival had taught her to trust no one, expect nothing, and protect herself at all costs. But she was tired. So deeply, completely, bone-crushingly tired. Fine, she said at last. I will go to the hospital, but I am not going to your apartment. I am not going anywhere your mother can find me. And this does not mean I forgive you. I know. I do not trust you. I know that too. Good, as long as we understand each other. Ethan took Grace to Mount Sinai, not the emergency room, the private wing, the one with rooms that looked like hotel suites. Dr. Catherine Aldridge, one of the top obstetricians in New York, met them despite the late hour. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, with reading glasses perched on her nose, and a manner that was both warm and absolutely authoritative. Let us take a look at you, Grace, she said, guiding her to the bed. I understand prenatal care has been limited. I could not afford it. Dr. Aldridge's expression did not change, but Ethan saw her jaw tighten, almost imperceptibly. We are going to fix that right now. She ran every test available: blood work, ultrasound, blood pressure, weight, iron levels, nutrition markers. She checked Grace methodically and thoroughly while Ethan stood by the window, trying to give Grace space, but unable to make himself leave. You are underweight, Dr. Aldridge said when the results came back. Anemic, which means your iron is too low. Blood pressure is lower than I would like. There are clear signs of chronic stress and physical exhaustion. Grace's hand went to her belly. But the baby? The baby, Dr. Aldridge said, and her voice softened, is measuring well. Strong heartbeat, active. Your son is a fighter. Son? Grace's eyes went wide. It is a boy? Would you like to see? Dr. Aldridge turned the ultrasound screen toward Grace, and there he was, a tiny person with a round head and little fists, and a heartbeat that filled the room like a drum, fast and strong and real. Grace fell apart. Not the quiet kitchen crying. This was the kind of crying that comes from 9 months of holding everything together with nothing but will and desperation. She put her hand over her mouth, but the sound came through anyway, raw and broken and beautiful. That is him, she whispered through her tears. That is really him? That is really him, Dr. Aldridge said gently, and he is doing remarkably well, considering everything you have both been through. Ethan stepped closer. On the screen, the baby moved, stretched, kicked. Can I? Ethan started, then stopped. Grace looked at him through her tears. For a moment, just one moment, the walls came down. She took his hand and placed it on her belly. Under his palm, something pushed back. A kick. Small, but steady. Grace felt it. It was a kick. but strong, his son. "Oh my God," Ethan breathed. "He does that constantly," Grace said, and there was the ghost of something almost like a smile on her face, "especially when I'm trying to sleep." For one perfect moment in that hospital room, with the sound of their baby's heartbeat filling the silence, everything was okay. Two parents seeing their child together for the first time. But perfect moments are fragile things, and this story was far from over. Ethan moved fast. It was what he did best. Within 24 hours, he had arranged security outside Grace's hospital room, called his attorney, Robert Whitfield, to begin emergency legal proceedings, and found a secure apartment in Brooklyn Heights. 2 bedrooms, lots of natural light, a doorman who screened every visitor. The lease was in Robert's name, completely untraceable to the Crawford family. Grace was released from the hospital after 2 days of observation. Dr. Aldridge prescribed rest, proper nutrition, prenatal vitamins, and twice-weekly checkups for the remaining weeks of pregnancy. "No more 12-hour shifts on your feet," Dr. Aldridge said firmly. "No more skipping meals, no more putting everyone else first. For the next few weeks, your only job is taking care of yourself and this baby." Grace moved into the Brooklyn Heights apartment with the 2 small suitcases that contained everything she owned in the world. Everything. 2 suitcases. That was 9 months of her life packed into 40 pounds of clothes, a few books, a toothbrush, and a single yellow baby blanket she had bought at a Goodwill store for $2. She set up the nursery. Ethan had it furnished with a white crib, a rocking chair, a changing table. But the yellow Goodwill blanket got the place of honor, draped over the crib rail. "That blanket cost $2, Grace said, smoothing it with her fingers. "It is the most valuable thing in this room," Ethan said. "Because you chose it. You were thinking about our son and trying to prepare for him even when you had almost nothing." Grace looked at him with surprise. The old Ethan would not have said something like that. The old Ethan would have replaced the blanket with something from a designer baby store without a second thought. Maybe he really was different. 3 days passed, then 5. Grace started to settle in. She ate regular meals. She slept in a real bed with clean sheets. She saw Dr. Aldridge, who reported the baby was growing well and Grace's health was improving. Ethan visited every day after work, but he kept the master bedroom for Grace and slept on the couch when he stayed late. They talked, really talked, more than they ever had during their marriage. On the 4th day, Grace was sitting in the nursery, folding the tiny clothes Ethan had brought, when her phone rang. An unknown number. "Mrs. Crawford, this is Janet Kowalski from New York City Administration for Children's Services." Grace's blood went cold. Every survival instinct she had developed over 9 months screamed to attention. "We have received a report of concern regarding the welfare of your unborn child. The report alleges prenatal neglect, including failure to obtain adequate medical care, unstable housing conditions, and questionable employment history. We would like to schedule a home visit." Grace could not breathe. The room tilted. She gripped the arm of the rocking chair so hard her knuckles went white. "This is a mistake," she managed. "I'm seeing a doctor regularly now. I have a safe apartment. I am fine. We take all reports seriously, Mrs. Crawford. We would like to visit tomorrow afternoon." After she hung up, Grace sat completely still for a full minute. Then she called Ethan. "She did it," Grace said, and her voice was shaking so hard the words barely held together. "Your mother called CPS on me." 24 hours later, Robert Whitfield stood in the Brooklyn apartment with Grace, projecting calm authority while they waited for the social worker. "This is a weaponized report," Robert told Grace, "filed by someone with a vendetta. It happens more often than you would think. Here's what you are going to do. Be polite. Be calm. Be honest. Show her the nursery, the medical records, the prenatal vitamins on the counter. She is going to see the clean apartment, a healthy mother, and absolutely no cause for concern. Janet Kowalski arrived at 2 o'clock. She was surprisingly kind, middle-aged, with tired eyes and a gentle manner that suggested she had seen real neglect and knew the difference between that and a personal grudge. She looked around the apartment, reviewed the medical records, asked questions. "Everything looks good here," she said finally. "I'm going to recommend closing this case." After she left, Grace collapsed on the couch and cried with relief. Ethan held her carefully. "It is over," he said. "She tried, and she failed." "It is not over," Grace said, pulling back. "Ethan, that was just the opening move. I know your mother. This is chess, not checkers." She was right, and the next move was already in play. 1 week later, Grace was walking home from her appointment with Dr. Aldridge when her phone buzzed. A Google alert she had set up for Ethan's name, an old habit from when she used to proudly read every article about her husband. The headline stopped her dead in the middle of the sidewalk. Crawford heirs secret. Billionaire's estranged wife found pregnant and destitute. Inside the custody battle tearing apart New York's most powerful family. It was in the New York Post, front page of the website, and it had everything. Grace's name, her photo, an old glamorous shot from a Crawford Industries gala, placed side by side with a grainy image of her in her monarch uniform, her address in Hunts Point, her 3 jobs, the CPS investigation. Someone had taken the worst 9 months of her life and turned it into entertainment. Grace called Ethan. Her voice was ice. "Have you seen it?" "I have seen it. My mother leaked it. She is the only one who knew all the details. They have my old address. They have photos of me at work. What if they find this apartment?" "They will not. The lease is not in your name." But Grace was not worried about reporters. She was worried about the narrative, because the article did not just humiliate her. It painted her as exactly what Margaret Crawford had always called her, a poor, desperate, negligent woman who could not even take care of herself, let alone a child. It was a weapon disguised as journalism, the kind of thing a judge might look at. That evening, Ethan's phone rang. It was his cousin, Rebecca. "Ethan, I need to give you a heads up. Aunt Margaret has retained the Wellington firm." Ethan's stomach dropped. Wellington and Associates was the most aggressive, most expensive, most ruthless family law firm in the state. They did not lose. "She is filing for emergency guardianship of the baby," Rebecca said. "She is arguing that neither you nor Grace is fit to raise a Crawford heir." Ethan went to the apartment to tell Grace. She was in the nursery, folding tiny onesies, placing them in the dresser drawer with careful hands. She looked peaceful, almost happy. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her, hating what he was about to destroy. "Grace." She looked up. Saw his face. The onesie fell from her hands. "What happened?" "My mother is filing for emergency guardianship of the baby." The color left Grace's face so completely and so quickly that she looked like a black and white photograph of herself. She did not sit in the rocking chair or on the bed. She sank to the floor of the nursery and wrapped both arms around her belly, as if physically shielding her child. "She is taking my baby. She is trying. She will not succeed. Robert says the case has no legal merit. You said the CPS thing would not go anywhere. You said the article would not happen. You keep saying she will not, and she cannot. And she keeps doing it, Ethan. Every time, she keeps doing it." Grace was breathing too fast. Her hands were shaking visibly. Robert is the best attorney in New York. He is already— I do not care about Robert, Grace screamed. It was the first time she had raised her voice since the alley, and the sound echoed off the nursery walls. Your mother has a team of lawyers. She has unlimited money. She has connections in every courtroom in this city. She has a newspaper article calling me a negligent mother. And all I have is nothing. I have nothing, Ethan. She stopped. Her hands went to her belly. Her face changed. Grace, what is wrong? I do not know. Something feels wrong. Something— She gasped, a sharp, sudden intake of breath. Something is wrong. Here is something most people do not understand until it happens to them. Stress is not just an emotion. It is a physical force. It lives in your body. It tightens muscles and raises blood pressure and floods your system with chemicals designed for running from predators, not for growing a baby. 9 months of relentless, crushing stress had been building in Grace's body like pressure in a pipe. And Margaret Crawford's guardianship filing was the final blow that made it burst. Ethan called 911. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes. Paramedics loaded Grace onto a stretcher while she gripped Ethan's hand so hard his fingers went numb. At the hospital, Dr. Aldridge met them. Her face was grim. She is contracting. The baby is showing signs of distress. We need to prepare for an emergency delivery. It is too early, Grace sobbed. He is not ready. He is at 37 weeks. It is early but viable. Grace, I need you to try to stay calm. Can you do that for me? Grace looked at Ethan, terror in her eyes, real, raw, bottomless terror. I am right here, Ethan said, holding her hand. I am not going anywhere. Anger than any board meeting, any negotiation, any deal. Longer than the 9 months of not knowing where Grace was. Grace was in labor. Early, stress-induced, and complicated. Dr. Aldridge moved between calm reassurance and rapid instructions to her team. Monitors beeped. Nurses moved in and out of the room with quiet urgency. The overhead lights felt too bright and too harsh. Ethan held Grace's hand through every contraction. He did not let go. Not once, not when she squeezed so hard he thought his bones might break. Not when she cried. Not when she said the words that terrified him most. I cannot do this, Grace whispered between contractions. Her face was pale and drenched in sweat. Her lips were almost blue. Yes, you can. You survived 9 months alone. You survived poverty and fear and everything my family threw at you. You can do this, Grace. You are the strongest person I have ever known. What if the baby is not okay? What if something happens to him because of the stress, because of everything? He is going to be fine. He is a fighter. He gets that from his mother. Grace looked at him through the haze of pain. If something happens to me, if I do not make it through this, nothing is happening to you. But if it does, promise me she will never get him. Promise me he will know I loved him more than anything in the entire world. You are going to tell him yourself. Every single day, for the rest of your life. At 2:47 in the morning, after a final, desperate push that seemed to take everything Grace had left, a sound filled the room. A cry. High and angry and absolutely furious at having been forced into the world 3 weeks ahead of schedule. It is a boy, Dr. Aldridge said, holding up a tiny, wrinkled, red-faced, screaming baby. And he is very, very angry about it. He gets that from me, Grace said, laughing and crying simultaneously. Her face was streaked with tears and sweat, and she was the most beautiful thing Ethan had ever seen. They placed the baby on Grace's chest. He was small, 5 pounds, 11 ounces, but he was breathing on his own, screaming on his own. And when Grace's hand touched his tiny back, he stopped crying and looked up at her with dark, serious, brand new eyes. Hi, Grace whispered. Hi, sweet boy. I am your mom. I have been waiting for you for a very long time. Ethan leaned over them both, one hand on Grace's shoulder, one finger touching the baby's impossibly small hand. The baby grabbed his finger and held on with a grip that seemed far too strong for someone who weighed less than a bag of flour. "What do we call him?" Ethan asked. His voice was wrecked, completely destroyed. "Oliver," Grace said. She had picked the name months ago, during a long, dark night in her Hunts Point apartment, lying on a mattress with broken springs, listening to rats in the walls. "It means olive tree, a symbol of peace, and that is what he is. My peace." "Our peace," Ethan said. "Oliver Crawford." Oliver stopped fussing and yawned. His tiny mouth opened wide, and then he fell asleep on his mother's chest with the absolute trust of someone who had never been given a reason not to trust. For one perfect moment in that hospital room, nothing else existed. Not Margaret, not lawyers, not newspaper articles, just three people at the very beginning of something. Oliver was 3 days old when Rebecca called Ethan again. He was in the hospital room, trying to change a diaper for the 4th time, while Grace watched from the bed with an expression that was equal parts amusement and horror. "You are putting it on backward," Grace said. "There is no backward. It is a diaper. It is symmetrical. It is absolutely not symmetrical. The tabs go in the front. These are the front tabs. Those are the back tabs." "How can you tell?" "Because there are little cartoon elephants on the front, and you have the elephants on his back." Ethan's phone rang. He looked at the screen, and his expression changed. "It is Rebecca," he answered, listened, and with every second that passed, his face went harder and colder. "What is it?" Grace asked when he hung up. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he sat down on the edge of Grace's bed, Oliver sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside them. "The Post article. The leak. It was not my mother." Grace stared at him. "What?" "It was Nicole, my ex-girlfriend. After I ended things at the restaurant, she started digging. She is a lawyer. She has resources, connections, access to databases. She found the CPS report, your old address, connected everything. She sold the story to the Post." Grace felt the floor tilt again. Nicole. A woman she had never even met. "But that is not all," Ethan continued. His voice was flat, controlled, the way it got when he was trying very hard not to explode. "Nicole contacted my mother. They have been talking, comparing notes, working together." "Working together, how?" "Nicole recorded the conversation I had with my mother in my office. Every threat I made about removing her from the board and freezing her trust fund. It is all on tape. They are planning to use it to argue that I am emotionally unstable and unfit to make decisions about the company or the baby." Grace's hand found Oliver in the bassinet. She rested her fingers on his tiny chest, feeling it rise and fall. "There is one more thing," Ethan said. "Of course there is. Nicole found your parents. She went to Pennsylvania. She told them everything. Your father is on his way to New York right now." Grace closed her eyes. Her father, Tom Bennett, but the man who had spent 30 years bending steel. The man who had taught her to ride a bicycle and checked under her bed for monsters. He was coming, and he was going to see what his daughter's life had become. "Grace," Ethan said carefully, "what do you want to do?" Grace opened her eyes, and Ethan saw something he had never seen in them before. Not fear, not sadness, not the defeated exhaustion of the past 9 months. He saw fire. "I am done running," she said. I am done hiding. I am done letting other people write my story." "What does that mean?" "It means I am going to fight. Not with lawyers, not with money. I am going to fight with the truth." 2 days later, they brought Oliver home from the hospital. Grace's father arrived the same morning. Tom Bennett was 58 years old, built like the iron worker he had been for 30 years. His hands were calloused. His face looked like it had been carved from granite. He did not call ahead. He just showed up. Ethan opened the door. Tom looked at him the way you would look at something you found on the bottom of your shoe. "You must be the billionaire who let my pregnant daughter live with rats," Tom said. "Mr. Bennett? Is she here? Dad?" Grace appeared behind Ethan, Oliver in her arms. Tom's granite face crumbled. His eyes went to the baby, then to his daughter, then back to the baby. His jaw worked, but nothing came out. "Hi, Daddy," Grace whispered. Tom crossed the room in 3 steps and wrapped his arms around both of them with a gentleness that contradicted every hard line of his body. This man, who probably had not cried in 30 years, was crying in the doorway of a Brooklyn Heights apartment. "Why did you not call me?" he said. "Why did you not come home? I was afraid she would come after you and Mom, too." "I do not care what that woman threatened. You are my daughter." He pulled back and looked at Oliver. "And this is my grandson." "Oliver," Grace said. "Oliver Crawford." Tom held the baby with surprising tenderness. Oliver looked up at his grandfather and grabbed his finger. "Strong grip," Tom said. "Takes after his mother." Then Tom turned to Ethan. "You and I need to talk. Outside." In the hallway, Tom did not waste words. "I am going to ask you one question, and you are going to answer it honestly. Are you going to protect my daughter this time?" "Yes." "Because I am looking at a man who let my baby girl sleep behind a broken lock in the worst neighborhood in the Bronx while he was living like a king. That is not something a father forgets." "I did not know." "You should have known. A man who loves a woman notices when she is drowning." Tom studied him for a long time. "Fix it. Not with money. Fix it for real." "I will. You had better. Because if you break her heart again, I will not need lawyers." Grace called a press conference. She told Ethan the night before, sitting on the couch after Oliver had fallen asleep, and he nearly dropped his coffee. "You want to what?" "I want to tell my story, on camera, in front of every reporter in New York." "Grace, you do not have to do this. Robert can handle the legal side. We can fight this in court." "I have been hiding for 9 months, Ethan. Hiding from your mother, hiding from Nicole, hiding from the truth. I am done hiding. They wrote my story for me. A desperate woman, a negligent mother, a gold digger. I am rewriting it. At least let me stand beside you." "No," Grace's voice was firm. "This is my story. I tell it alone." Robert Whitfield arranged it. A conference room at Crawford Industries. Microphones, cameras, every major outlet in the city. At 3:00 the next afternoon, Grace walked into a room full of reporters. She wore a simple navy dress. Her hair was down. She carried no notes. Her hands were steady. Here is something worth knowing, and this might be the most important thing in this entire story. When people try to define you, when they write your story for you and fill it with lies and assumptions and cruelty, the most powerful thing you can do is open your mouth and speak your own truth. You do not need to shout. You do not need to cry. You just need to stand there, look people in the eye, and refuse to be anyone's victim. Grace stood at the podium and looked at the cameras. "My name is Grace Crawford. 9 months ago, I disappeared. Today, I am going to tell you why." She told them everything. Not with anger, not with tears, with calm, devastating, unshakable clarity. She told them about Margaret's $2 million check, about the threats to take her baby, about the CPS report filed to make her look unfit, about the Post article designed to destroy her public reputation. She told them about working 3 jobs while pregnant, about choosing between food and medical care, about jamming a chair under her door handle every night. She told them about the yellow blanket from Goodwill, $2, the only thing she could afford to buy for her baby. I did not leave my husband because I stopped loving him, Grace said. I left because someone made me believe that loving him was not enough to protect my child. And for 9 months, I lived in fear. Not fear of poverty, not fear of hard work, fear that the one thing I loved most in this world would be taken from me. She paused. The room was so silent, you could hear the cameras clicking. I am not here to ask for sympathy. I am here because someone tried to take my voice, and I am taking it back. No mother should ever have to choose between her safety and her child. No woman should ever be made to feel that she is not enough. Not by a stranger, not by a mother-in-law, not by anyone. She took a breath. That is all I have to say. I will not be taking questions. Grace walked out. The press conference went viral. 10 million views in 4 hours. 50 million by the next morning. Women across the country shared it with comments like, "This is what real strength looks like." And she did not just tell her story. She set herself free. The public reaction destroyed Margaret Crawford's position. Crawford Industries stock dipped. Board members demanded emergency meetings. The company issued a statement distancing itself from Margaret's personal actions. Nicole Ashford's law firm launched an internal investigation after clients complained about Nicole using company resources for personal vendettas. She was fired within a week. The recording Nicole had given Margaret backfired completely. Instead of making Ethan look unstable, the public overwhelmingly sided with a man who stood up to his own mother to protect his wife and baby. Wellington and Associates quietly withdrew the guardianship petition. The legal fees were enormous, and the firm did not like being on the losing side of public opinion. Within 10 days of Grace's press conference, every weapon Margaret Crawford had built was destroyed. Not by money, not by lawyers, by the truth, spoken clearly, by a woman who refused to be afraid anymore. 3 weeks after the press conference, on a quiet Tuesday morning, there was a knock at the Brooklyn apartment door. Grace opened it. Margaret Crawford stood in the hallway. She looked diminished. That was the only word for it. The Chanel suit was wrinkled. The perfect silver blonde hair was slightly disheveled. She looked like a woman who had not slept in days, maybe weeks. "I am not supposed to be here," Margaret said. "The restraining order." "I know," Grace said, "and I could call the police right now." "I know." They stood there, two women on either side of a threshold that represented everything that had gone wrong between them. "Can I come in?" Margaret asked. Every instinct in Grace's body screamed no. But she thought about Oliver, sleeping in his crib. She thought about the kind of world she wanted her son to grow up in. She thought about whether the cycle of fear and anger would ever end if someone did not take the first step. 5 minutes, Grace said. "And if you raise your voice, even once, I am calling 911. Margaret sat on the couch, not with her usual elegant authority, heavily, like a woman carrying a weight she could no longer bear. "I came to apologize," she said. "And before you say it, yes, I know I should have done this months ago, years ago." "You tried to take my son," Grace said. "You called CPS. You hired lawyers to rip my baby from my arms. An apology does not cover that." "I know." "Then why are you here?" Margaret was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was different, smaller, stripped of the armor she had worn for decades. "When Ethan's father died, Ethan was 12. I was terrified. I had a company to run, a child to raise, and a world that expected me to fall apart. So I became someone who could not fall apart. Someone hard, someone controlled, someone who saw every person as either useful or a threat. She looked at her hands. They were shaking. You were a threat, Grace. Not because you were bad for Ethan, because you were good for him. You made him happy in a way that had nothing to do with success or money or the Crawford name. And I was afraid that if he had you, he would not need me anymore. I could not lose him too. The room was silent except for the sound of traffic outside and the soft white noise from Oliver's room. I have been seeing a therapist, Margaret said. First time in my life. She told me I have control issues. She almost laughed, as if I did not already know. Grace listened, without speaking. She let the silence do its work. I am not asking for forgiveness, Margaret said. I do not deserve it. I am asking for a chance, not for me, for Oliver. Every child deserves to know their grandmother, a real grandmother, not the person I was. Grace sat down across from Margaret and looked at her directly, not with anger, not with fear. With the steady, clear-eyed gaze of a woman who had survived the worst Margaret could throw at her and come out the other side. Here's what is going to happen, Grace said. You are going to continue therapy. Every week. You are going to write a formal, public apology, not to Ethan, to me. You are going to drop every legal action completely and permanently. And you are going to understand, deep in your bones, that I am Oliver's mother. My word is final when it comes to my son. Yes. If you violate the restraining order again, I will press charges. No second chances. I understand. And Margaret. Grace leaned forward. If I ever see you trying to control my son the way you controlled Ethan, I will make that press conference look like a friendly chat. Margaret nodded. She looked at Grace with something that might have been, for the first time in their entire history, genuine respect. You are not the woman I thought you were, Margaret said quietly. No, Grace agreed. I never was. You just never bothered to find out. Margaret published her apology in the New York Times the following week. 3 paragraphs, no excuses, no qualifications, just the truth. Nicole Ashford disappeared from their lives entirely. Last anyone heard, she had moved to Chicago. Grace's mother, Diane, flew in from Pennsylvania. She was a small, soft-spoken woman who cried when she saw Oliver and did not stop for approximately 6 hours. She reorganized the linen closet, made 3 casseroles, and taught Ethan how to properly swaddle a baby. You are wrapping him like a burrito, Diane said, watching Ethan struggle. I am doing my best. Try less. Be gentle, firm, but gentle, like this. She took Oliver, wrapped him perfectly in 3 seconds flat, and handed him back. How did you do that? Ethan asked, genuinely amazed. I raised 3 children. You learn. Ethan and Grace found their rhythm. Not a romantic rhythm, not yet. A partnership. They traded off night feedings. They argued about the thermostat. They discovered that Oliver had a remarkable talent for projectile spit-up aimed directly at freshly dry-cleaned shirts. He has excellent aim, Ethan said one morning, holding a destroyed dress shirt at arm's length. He gets that from you. I have never spit up on a designer shirt in my life. He also got a senator during a Zoom call. The board was not amused. Oliver was very amused. He laughed for 5 minutes. Your son has good comedic timing. Something was happening between them. Slowly, carefully, like a plant growing back after a fire. Not the old love, which had been real but blind. Something new. Something with eyes wide open. One night, after Oliver finally fell asleep, which took 45 minutes of rocking and one very specific, white noise machine setting, they sat on the couch together. I need to say something, Ethan said. Okay? I am sorry. Not just for my mother. For me. For not seeing you. For putting work first every single day. for believing rumors instead of asking you directly, for making you feel invisible in your own marriage. It did hurt, Grace said. It really did. I am in therapy now, twice a week. His name is Dr. Richard Hartwell. He is very calm, and it is extremely annoying. Grace almost smiled. What does he say? He says I have avoidant attachment patterns rooted in childhood emotional neglect, which is apparently a fancy way of saying my mother taught me not to feel things, and I became an expert at it. That does explain a lot. He also says I need to stop trying to fix things with grand gestures and start fixing them with small, consistent actions. Show up. Listen. Be present. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. I am not ready to be your wife again, Grace said. I know. I might never be. I know that too. But I am open to the possibility that someday I might be open to being ready. Ethan blinked. Was that a yes? That was a do not mess this up. I will take it. 6 months later, Oliver was sitting up on his own, laughing at everything, and deeply suspicious of the family cat. The cat, a tabby named Walter that Grace had adopted, because every child needs to learn about responsibility, regarded Oliver with equal suspicion. They had reached a silent agreement. Oliver stared at Walter. Walter stared at Oliver. Neither blinked first. Ethan and Grace renewed their vows, quietly, in the apartment. No photographers, no press, no 300-person guest list. Just them, Oliver, Tom, and Diane, Dr. Aldridge, Robert Whitfield, and Margaret, who sat in the corner and cried silently and did not try to take charge of a single thing. Robert had drawn up a post-nuptial agreement with one particular clause that said, in legalese, if Ethan ever ignored Grace's feelings or failed to protect her again, she would receive everything, including the cat. That seems fair, Ethan had said, signing it without hesitation. On a Sunday in October, 6 months after Oliver was born, the whole family went to Central Park. The leaves were turning gold and red. The air was crisp and clean and smelled like autumn. Oliver sat on a blanket on the grass, aggressively chewing a teething ring and occasionally shouting at passing birds with great authority. He is going to be a talker, Tom said. Like his mother. I was quiet as a child, Grace protested. You talked in your sleep, complete sentences by age 2. Argued with the dog. I was making my case. Ethan sat beside Grace, watching Oliver try to eat a leaf. I keep thinking about that night at Monarch, Ethan said, when I saw you standing there in that uniform. What if I had gone to a different restaurant? What if you had had the night off? What if I had never found you? But you did find me. I almost did not. And that terrifies me. I almost missed all of this because I was too blind, too busy, too controlled by someone else's idea of what my life should look like. Here's the last thing I want to leave you with, and it might be the most important part of this entire story. Pay attention. Not later. Not when it is convenient. Not when someone is already walking out the door. Right now. Today. This moment. The people who matter most to you are the easiest ones to overlook because they are always there. They are always there until the day they are not. And by then, it might be too late. Ethan Crawford was lucky. He almost lost everything. He almost lost Grace and Oliver and the chance to be the man he should have been all along. But he got a second chance. Not everyone does. Grace leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder. You are getting philosophical. Therapy, it is a whole thing. Oliver threw his teething ring and shrieked with delight. Tom picked it up. Oliver threw it again. Tom picked it up. This cycle repeated for approximately 30 minutes. Tom did not seem to mind. Da-da, Oliver said, looking directly at Ethan. Ethan's face lit up. He said it. Did you hear that? He said it. He has been saying it for 2 weeks, Grace said, grinning. You just were not listening. I am listening now, Ethan said, picking up his son and holding him against his chest. I promise you, buddy, I am listening now. Margaret sat nearby on the grass, watching her grandson. She did not try to take over. She did not give instructions. She just sat there, a woman learning, very slowly, how to be part of a family instead of running one. He has your chin, Margaret said to Grace. Tentatively, carefully, like someone testing thin ice. I know, Grace said. And then, because healing is a choice you make every day, even when it is hard, even when every part of you still remembers the pain, she added, he has the Crawford stubbornness, though. Margaret almost smiled. Diane made sandwiches. Tom told Oliver stories about building bridges. Walter the cat sat in a patch of sunlight and ignored everyone. The billionaire who had frozen when he saw his pregnant ex-wife working as a waitress had learned the hardest lesson of his life. Not about money, he had plenty of that. Not about power, he had more than enough. The lesson was simpler and infinitely harder. See the people you love, not their success or their failures, not what they can give you or what they cost you. See them, their fears, their pain, their quiet, desperate, courageous fight to be okay. Because if you look away, even for a moment, they might disappear, and you might spend the rest of your life standing in an alley behind a restaurant, learning the truth too late. Ethan did not learn too late. It was close. Closer than he ever wanted to think about, but it was not too late. And every morning, when he woke up in the apartment in Brooklyn Heights and heard Oliver babbling in the nursery and felt Grace sleeping peacefully beside him, no chair jammed under the door, no fear on her face, he remembered. He remembered the alley, the waitress uniform, the yellow blanket from Goodwill, the sound of his son's heartbeat on that ultrasound screen, and he made the same promise to himself that he made every single day. Never again. Never again. The sun set over Central Park, casting golden light over a family that had almost been destroyed, but chose, despite everything, to find its way back, not to perfection. Perfection was never the goal. To something better, something real, something that could survive the worst and still choose love. And if you take nothing else from this story, take this. It is never too late to see the people you love. It is never too late to listen. It is never too late to choose differently. But do not wait for the restaurant. Do not wait for the alley. Do not wait until the person you love is crying on a milk crate in a kitchen while carrying your child. Start now. Start today. Start with the person sitting next to you. I hope this story moved you. If it did, hit that like button. Drop a comment and tell me, what is the biggest lesson you have ever learned about love, about family, about the people who matter most? And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who is going through a hard time, someone who feels invisible, someone who is fighting alone, share this video with them. Let them know they are not alone. Subscribe. If you have not already, I will see you in the next one. This story was created for entertainment and educational purposes. All characters and events are fictional. Any resemblance to real persons is purely coincidental. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic threats or abuse, please contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-7-997-233. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful storytelling with real-life lessons. Every character, every scene, and every word was crafted with one purpose: to remind you that the people who love you the most are often the ones suffering in silence. Thank you for watching until the end. We will see you in the next story.